the years, the heightened pageantry of Grandma's visit never failed to annoy Stevie. Gnarled walking stick in the door 6 inches before her rickety body, Stevie's grandmother never missed a Christmas. It was a family performance that had begun with his birth and fastened into repetitious tradition with the arrival of a brother, then a sister. It had evolved into a family pantomime, stacking the children in the hallway to let the witch inspect them for another year's growth. She would start with Stevie's baby sister, 6 years old, and already so full of herself that he constantly contrived new ways of torturing the girl. The old woman would fold lower over the child as 3 brittle fingers would reach out to pinch the girl's cheek. The one good thing Stevie could say about his sister was that she always shivered so obviously at that. His mother would be standing as the shadow, looking comically anxious, nodding appropriately, silent, big-eyed responses behind the old woman's back. His father would be at his mother's elbow, glowing. The old hag would next hitch up to Stevie's younger brother. She'd duck her head back and bulge her filmy grey eyes at him. She would follow this exhibition with the same exclamation every year. "This can't be my Bobby. How you've grown!" The old lady would then motion at Stevie's father, never taking her eyes off poor Bobby. What followed was the presentation of the handbag and the big charade of rummaging for a coin. "I think I have something in here for my big boy," she'd say, scratching at the leather in the bottom of her cracked warm bag. And sure enough, after a few minutes of incredible suspense, she would retrieve a blackened coin. Squeezing it between her thumb and finger, she would force Bobby to hold out his hand and then plop the nasty thing into the centre of his palm. Stevie would just shake his head. But Bobby, his brother, would fall for it every time and reward the crone with a woozy grin of delight. Then the witch would sidle crab-like down towards Stevie, her filmy eyes growing danker with every step. And Stevie. She would gaze at him as though pondering a field of fragrant poppies and then press her sandpaper lips to his cheek. Stevie would stand rigid to allow it. "Hi, Grandma." "My little boy." She would take back a half step and bloom. Stevie simply hated her. He was not a little boy. He was no one's little boy. He was 13. He was a young man, and every time he had got an agreement of the fact from his parents, she would show up and toss the whole thing backwards. But Stevie would smile at her, though perfect in his performance, while his heart fed on dark hopes. "Yeah, Grandma, I figured out a new game. I'm going to hide your stupid stick tonight and watch as you stumble down the stairs trying to find it." He would press the image into the piggy bank of his thoughts, storing it and looking forward to the interest it might accrue. The evening, as always, proceeded then into a complete farce, as his father, heading the charge, would bubble and gush over the culinary excesses of Stevie's mother, with all standing at the table, then sitting, then waiting for the ritual splendid carving of the turkey, as Stevie always found himself across the table from her. It happened no matter where he contrived to seat himself. Sitting through dinner, watching her half chew, half choke her food down was an appalling torture. But worse was watching as his parents catered to her every twitch and ramble, tending her as they prayed, he imagined, that she'd live long enough to be dropped off at his Uncle Phil's. Stevie would read all this in their chattering concern, their insistent coddling of the dried creature. And by dessert, he would always have an ensemble of demise fitted out for her in his mind. He prided himself that the deaths he considered for the witch were never repeated, that his gruesome repertoire was always tailored for the specific holiday. But this particular year, there were cherries for dessert. Stevie rummaged his tongue over the stone in the dark between his teeth. His mother was babbling. His father was delving for another bowl of dessert. His sister was indifferently slapping at her food, while Bobby attempted to kick her in the shins under the table. Stevie eyed his grandmother, rolling the cherry stone over and over his tongue, thinking, stone, stick, stuck, stick, stuck. He was so immersed in his fantasy, he did not notice his grandmother's expression change from content to concern. Stick, stuck, stick, stuck. It was his mother's scream that startled him out of his reverie. His father was up attempting the Heimlich manoeuvre. His mother was clutching at his sister's hand, the little girl on the edge of a shattering howl of fear, while Bobby, was cringing in his seat, looking like he was either going to piss himself or let loose the most deadly, fragrant fart he'd ever concocted. And across from Stevie, his grandmother looked even more surprised. He found himself locked deep into the old woman's cataracts, wrestled as they flicked back and forth. He could not bring himself to look away. Sinking into her eyes, he grew afraid. She was taking his vision, yanking it downwards towards her milky world. The sound of fear in the dining room muffled into background noise as Stevie struggled to break free of her. He felt himself scooped into a little point of thought, spun into a thread that she drew into her, and understanding that in the next second he would be lost in that wet greyness behind her eyes, a whip crack of terror snatched his thought from her grip, and the distinct pop of the cherry stone was heard as it was expelled. Instantly, sound became distinct. Sobbing, queries, concern. Through slowly focusing eyes, Stevie saw his grandmother smiling radiantly at him. "Thank you, little one," she said. He excused himself from the table and fled the room. On his back, alone in his room, Stevie was at the beginning of a favourite fantasy. Staring at the ceiling, noticing suddenly at the very centre of a space a white sparkle. It pops, flashes, sending sprays of cinder down upon the bed. The fluttering white snaps to golden hot, and a tongue of flame stretches down to lick at him. Smoke guides the tongue into the room, escorts it across the field of the ceiling, suggesting especially dry patches, steering it clear of newly mended plaster. The flame, florid and waltzing, ravages the roof of his room. He smiles up at it, in certain knowledge that it has merely come to tell him that its duty is done. He knows that it has already accomplished the purging of his family from the ground floor, the flame. But tonight, his fantasy was snuffed before it could breathe. Stevie turned to face the wall and placed an open palm against the plaster, seeking the coldness of the night outside. He had not left his room since dinner. His parents made the effort earlier to coax him out, thinking that his timidity was due to his grandmother's attack. They pleaded with him, assured him that she was all better and wanted to see him as well. But he was not interested that she was all better. He was more interested that she had almost died, and he had almost been pulled in after her. But studying this in his mind, the most uncomfortable point to the whole matter was that at the very second it all began, he had been thinking how wonderful it would be if she simply strangled on that stupid cherry she was playing with. And sure enough, she had. How had that been possible? Something had happened that he did not understand, that no one in his house could possibly explain. Stevie sat up in his bed, his face smacking into a shaft of moonlight. Bright beckoned beyond the glaze of his bedroom window, leading Stevie to contemplate how badly he needed a place to think, somewhere where he would not be disturbed. He stood and looked out into the night beyond his bedroom, out into the distance where he knew there would be solitude. The quarry. The McClintock quarry was a favourite haunt of local kids. You couldn't really see it from Stevie's bedroom, just the beginning of the forest that hid it. The backyard slipped down into a little trench. Just beyond this, a mesh fence separated his family's property from the beginning of the quarry property. It was a perfect place to be alone. It was spooky, secluded, and labelled off limits by every parent in the area. Slowly, Stevie turned to stare at his bedroom door. He felt the heft of the silence of the house. He gathered his clothes from the dresser beside his bed and dressed warmly, prepared to sit out in the cold of the quarry as long as he needed to, because he was going to unravel this mystery, and mastering it, maybe do it right next time. Dressed, Stevie was ready to leave his room, yet hesitated a fraction in reaching for the knob to his bedroom door to swiftly consider that every creak and whisper that the house could use it would to announce the intention of his exit. He would need to be especially careful. Stevie quickly grabbed at the doorknob and was suddenly blinded by a flare of moonlight that turned the bedroom door into a brilliant sheen of bright. His room was entirely consumed in pure white light. Sharp pain bore through his eyes, etching an image. His grandmother, lying in her bed across the hall. Head turned in his direction, waiting for him. Stevie's heart trotted between breaths. He expelled the doorknob from his grasp. Immediately, the room was as it was, in docile moonlight and silence. Confused, Stevie stood staring at his bedroom door as the barest of whispers slowly played with his hearing. "Don't be frightened, little boy. It's just a door." Stevie turned round and found himself alone. He faced the door again. A breeze softly slipped into the hollow of his right hand. Gently, it raised his grip to the doorknob and left his fingers on the cold brass. Silence. Stevie turned the knob and carefully stepped out into the hallway. His parents' room was to the left. Their door was securely closed. Across the hall, where his grandmother was staying, that door to the little spare bedroom was also shut. It was obvious no one was awake. His little fright had just been a belch of guilt. Stevie turned to head down the main stairs. "Don't be frightened, little boy. I want to talk to you. Just open the door." Reached out for the doorknob to his grandmother's room, twisted it open, and unconsciously stepped inside. She had the little reading lamp on and was sitting up in the bed, a garish floral shawl cocooned about her shoulders. Her stringy white hair spilled about her face, down about the milky eyes and the radiant smile. "Come sit by me." She motioned towards a chair at her bedside and then refolded her dry hands upon her lap. Stevie was too curious to be frightened and did as his grandmother asked. She looked at him so sweetly she might have been on the verge of offering him a cookie. "You thought about killing me, didn't you?" She smiled as though there could be no denial for a response, and then coughed a dry, almost inaudible chuckle. "You must be more careful in future." She fixed him with a proud, reproaching grin and sighed deeply. "I'll be going on soon enough, you know. There's no need for you to hurry me." A delicious curiosity got the better of him. "What happened?" He moved from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed, suddenly broaching a familiarity that he had never known before. "I didn't really mean for anything to happen to you, Grandma." At the lie, her face soured into a grimace that shot him back to his chair. "Didn't you?" Her voice was harsh, her smile gone. "Didn't you, Stevie?" She leaned hard towards him. At once he was consumed by the stench of lavender, cloying at his throat, drowning him in its stink. He thought he would choke too. "How does it feel?" She lay back slowly, her stare as bright as the moon. "Not so nice, huh?" Languidly, the odour slowly unravelled from his nostrils, withdrew. Calming to shallow gasps, Stevie sat in stunned appreciation. "How, Grandma? Can you show me how?" She rested her head upon the pillow. The smile that slowly blossomed on her lips was rich with irony. "So, the old witch has something to offer after all, Stevie smiled, tantalised to discover how much she knew of his thoughts. "Oh, yes, that's simple enough," she said, waving away the wonder with appreciative disdain. "I know much more than that." "Do you?" He was again on the edge of her bed, hungry to be shown. "Not tonight, I'm tired." She settled into the cushions in a sigh worthy of Camille and turned a slow glance at poor hungry Stevie. "Maybe tomorrow night." The smile and the faint whisper of lavender caressed him. "If you don't kill me." He squirmed on his hands and appropriately looked down at the floor. She rustled her dry laugh again and reached a hand along the bed covers towards him. "Don't be so impatient. There's so much for you to understand first." She winked at him. "You're at that age, you know. If you're not careful, you will burn the house down." "You heard that too?" Stevie was in awe. "You're not hard to follow, little one." She sunk down into the blanket, keeping his hand in hers. She fixed him with a single eye. "Tonight's not a good night for you to go to the quarry." Stevie started at the accusation. "I wasn't." She merely flashed him a look. "You can't lie to me. Remember that." "Yes, Grandma." "There are some things you need to be taught before you go to that place again." "What?" "You'll have to trust me." She wielded a sudden frown that actually made Stevie shudder. There was something that she was, yes, afraid of. There is something, and I don't want you going out there to cause your ignorant mischief. Now go to bed." The door opened behind him. The moonlight beckoned him back across the hall. Long ago abandoned, the quarry had been left to fill with rain. The lap of water was a dark skirt that obscured proper observation. Its depth could not be penetrated. No one could recall how far down the bottom was. No one wanted to find out. That night, Stevie dreamt that there was a candle in the quarry. Just upon the edge of the lake, it sat in the window of a little shack, its light solid and soulful. In the clear darkness of his dream, Stevie watched the peaceful flicker of the candle and found his mind stuck to the curiosity of wondering who lived there in that warm and comfortable room. Who had lit the candle?